Earlier this year, I posted polls to the Warframe forums and Reddit and asked fellow players simply what were their top 5 picks for each weapon type: primaries, secondaries, and melee weapons. These didn't have to be the most efficient, most played, most damaging, or just their favorites. It was simply their top 5 for whatever they wanted to play with. My personal goal was to figure out what was being played with the least. Here's why. Warframe is a game most often played around the mid-tier of the game's difficulty. Depending on your progression, this means facing enemies that are somewhere between level 25 to 45, give or take 5 levels. But what this allows for those of us who feel that variety is the spice of Warframe's life is that we don't always have to play with the most efficient, badass, end-all be-all weapons to enjoy our gameplay. My goal here in the 88th Armory is to show you some of those weapons you might have written off or haven't picked up in a long time, and to find builds for the mid-game that might possibly find their way into the endgame. I'm Scott from Ramble Entertainment, and this is Season 1 of the 88th Armory. This week, the weapon or weapons we want to look at are the Twin Gremlins. They're a bit closer to our philosophy with the 88th Armory of finding the weapons that function in the mid-game. And so let's go ahead and get right into the stats with that. The Twin Gremlins are acquired from Vor and Lect Krill at Ceres now with the change to the star chart, and they're a pair of akimbo pistols that fire bolts, much like the bolter or the Telos Akbolto or the Bolto, and they're easy to write off. They could probably easily be looked at as mastery fodder, and I feel like the reason for this is where we start to get into the question, where do we find our damage? So with that in mind, let's look at our Grineer build. Now, the Grineer build uses Radiation and Toxin, and I utilize Critical Chance and Critical Multiplier. Now, you'll notice that this is Critical Multiplier on a 1.5 times damage. The reason for that I add critical damage to these is because that is actually where the damage for these weapons come from. And in the latter half of the video, I will show you why I feel that way with a pure, just strictly damage build. One of the reasons before we get into the latter half of the video is because with all of the multi-shot that pistols can afford, you basically have the opportunity at 28.7 crit chance to do 1 crit shot per shot. You're basically firing 3 bolts per shot, and out of all 3 of those, one has a very good chance of going crit. Now, these are also, as you can see in the background, a great weapon to also go with Mesa, and you'll see why when we get into the mod section for these weapons. So let's also take a look at the Corpus style for these weapons. Now, Corpus are going to be the only build I really don't recommend taking these akimbo-style weapons out for. Basically, with shields, Corpus will prevent you from really hitting most of your crit damage that allows the Twin Gremlins to actually do their mid to high mid-tier style damage against level 30, 40, sometimes 50 level enemies. They're really better off against the infested, and this is again because, to me, where the damage comes from on these weapons is utilizing that near 30% chance, crit chance, and then adding damage through the critical multiplier. Again, as we saw with the Sobek, adding crit isn't just adding a single type of damage, like adding heat damage. No, instead, you're multiplying all damage types by 3.2, and that's with 180% multi-shot. So you're basically firing 3 rounds per every shot, which gives you an opportunity to see, as you can see here, crit damage per shot. And as I believe I already mentioned, these are also a great combination with Mesa, because they fulfill a lot of what she utilizes in damage for her Peacemakers: crit, multiplier, crit chance, and some elemental damage with a bit more, I believe, status chance. We'll see when I get back to my builds. So as some infested footage plays in the background, we have our build, and again, I return to where I asked that simple question: where do we find our damage? And this is the question I ask myself a lot with a lot of weapons, whether I'm trying to get them up to the upper echelons of play within the game, or just trying to get a weapon to work for some variety in the mid-tier of the game. And with the Twin Gremlins, I found that to get them to work within a scope of damage without sacrificing mod slots for ammo, or using up other mod slots for more different kinds of damage, with 2 mods we basically get the weapon to work. We add critical damage, which was surprising even to me for a 1.5 multiplier. You would think, oh, you don't really aim for crit on that, but achieving almost that 1/3 of every shot's doing crit damage, and then you add the crit multiplier. You're multiplying all the different damage types that you have for the weapons, and then you're utilizing your damage types, of course, with Hornet Strike and the multi-shot, which allows us to crit almost every single time. Now, of course, what you see here in the background is a corrosive heat build against the infested, doing 1,000 for every crit tick, which is phenomenal for these weapons as a mid-tier weapon. And now I would say on this build, for the radiation build, I would probably sacrifice Scorch for heated charge. The reason I would do this is because none of those statuses really help you to kill at the end of the day. Toxin, a bit, yeah. You're not really doing shotgun amounts of toxin damage with these. Really, you're getting your damage out of, again, that crit multiplier and just doing the proper damage types. When it comes to converted builds, so you would have corrosive here with some heat here. Basically, of course, you can look to add some status, get up to 50% status, rip off the armor with that corrosive proc, or, add some heat proc to do a bit of control and a bit extra damage. With Corpus, again, not a weapon I typically take out against the Corpus. It limits where the weapon does its damage, crit damage. And so if I did want to take them out against the Corpus, I would, again, sacrifice additional status chance for damage to rip off those shields to give you more opportunity to crit. So with that in mind, let's take a look at our final build that we compare to when saying, well, should we go with crit or should we just go with pure damage? So what we have here is the converted build, and what you'll see is the conversion of the crit build into a damage and status build, and in the background what plays is pure damage and status weaponry. I go with a radiation and viral damage build here. Viral used at 50% chance to cut down on health, and radiation to what I feel do the most damage to the Grineer types of the corrupted enemies. Your Bombards, your Butchers, Lancer types, etc. Now, of course, you're going to have some problems against the Heavy Gunners. However, really, at the end of the day, you can cut down on Heavy Gunner health with the viral procs, and your shielded enemies. I still feel like when you have max mods, you just do a ton of damage, so you can just rip through their shield and then cut their health in half with viral procs. Now, also, you're doing impact damage. It's not a lot of impact damage, but you're doing enough. Now, what I will say is, I mean, I proved to myself that I preferred the build I came up with here. Basically, I proved to myself that I like the crit build. It saves on ammo, and that this basically makes the weapons a bit more ammo inefficient, and really you're just not DPSing down targets as fast as you do with the crit damage. Again, this is a personal choice. Now, of course, you can go and sacrifice a damage mod for adding ammo, say trick mag, primed pistol ammo mutation, regular pistol ammo mutation, but really, for me, at the end of the day, I found that the weapons were plenty ammo efficient with crit damage going into level 30, 40, sometimes even 50 missions, whether they be endless or not, survivals, defenses, mobile defenses, excavations, etc. Obviously, mobile defenses aren't endless. But really, it was surprising to me when I wanted to give these guys a chance. Let's go ahead and let the footage play in the background without the YouTube footage. It was surprising to me when I found that I wanted to add crit damage to a 1.5 times multiplier. But again, sometimes when you want variety, you've got to think outside the box to find where our damage comes from. And really, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Is it doesn't matter how low something's stats feel at the end of the day. What matters is how much damage it looks like it's doing, and they do a phenomenal job when it comes to fighting mid-tier enemies. And really, I don't recommend taking the Twin Gremlins out against swordy enemies. I don't really recommend them against your high-level enemies. These are here just for fun and just to stir things up. It's also very much worth noting on this pause screen that the weapons have a very high accuracy, even for bolt weapons, and even accounting for travel time. They're great for hitting those headshots, and that can really help to add to the damage as well. A final note before we close out this episode is that, of course, combining these with the, not Smita, Adarza Kavat is a great choice as well. Honestly, the Adarza is becoming a personal favorite of mine, and combining it, even here with the Smita, you can see that you just hit higher numbers, and the Adarza will provide more consistency with that. I hope you guys enjoyed the Twin Gremlins. Again, a truly mid-tier weapon that allows you to spice up the life of your Warframe gameplay with variety, with a cool bolt action. Well, technically it's not bolt action, it's bolt firing weapon. We'll be back next week with another episode of the 88th. Stay tuned.